The advent of Pokémon Scarlet and Violet presented the notion of time-traveling Pokémon for the first time in the series, with the exception of Celebi, of course. In the main story, the Pokémon professor, either Sada or Turo, depending on the game, managed to send Pokéballs through time, to either the past or the future, and in so doing bring to the present Paldea region creatures from different times. We have a video explaining the terrible future that this Pokémon might have originated from that I encourage you to check out later. However, today in Rebel Culture, we will focus on the past paradox Pokémon, brought to the present by Professor Sada in Pokémon Scarlet, and how it is not the first time in the series that we are presented with Pokémon of the distant past. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We have tons of content on Pokémon that you simply can't miss. There is a subsection of Pokémon that has been present from the very first game in the series that already introduced the player the idea of Pokémon from a distant past. And while the past paradox Pokémon might have stolen the spotlight in recent months with the success of Pokémon Scarlet, I want to focus on the time-traveling Pokémon that took the long way to reach our days. I am talking, of course, about fossil Pokémon. To briefly explain what these Pokémon are and what makes them special, we must venture back to the first Pokémon games, Red and Green, released in 1996 in Japan, where the main player was presented with a choice of two fossils that they ran into in Mount Moon. Whichever fossil the player selects will be brought back to life at the laboratory at Cinnabar Island. That will result in the trainer receiving either a Kabuto or an Omanite, depending on which fossil they picked. Throughout the game, the player will also find the Red Amber, another item holding enough DNA to create the ancient Pokémon Aerodactyl. We are told that these Pokémon belong to ancient times, and that only modern technology has been able to bring them back to life, as advances in genetics and biology have made it possible. Almost every mainland game that followed Red and Green added new fossil Pokémon to the roster, becoming a sort of subgroup in the Pokédex. It will not be until almost 27 years later, with the release of Scarlet and Violet and the information that can be found in the Scarlet book, that we would receive confirmation that Pokémon evolve. With this, I obviously refer to the Darwinian evolution we see in our world, where present animals have changed throughout the eons to better adapt to their environment. In Pokémon Scarlet, we see, for example, the ancient versions of Pokémons like Salamence, Donphan, and Jigglypuff, in their past paradox forms, Roaring Moon, Great Tusk, and Screaming Tail. This seems to indicate quite clearly that while ancient Pokémon are different enough from their modern counterparts to be considered entirely separate organisms, as we see by the fact that they occupy different spots in the Pokédex, natural Darwinian evolution does in fact take place in the Pokémon universe. This also makes it possible that fossil Pokémon are ancient versions of modern Pokémon, much like it was the case with the time-traveling past paradox Pokémon. It is important to mention that this connection is never made explicit in the games, though there is enough information to conjure such a relation. Obviously, nothing guarantees that every Pokémon that existed millions of years ago will have a modern relative today, since at some point, the biological line might have gotten extinct. But there are a few fossil Pokémon that share some characteristics with present Pokémon, at least enough to start theorizing. For example, Kabutops, the evolved form of one of the first fossil Pokémons we ever met in this series. Kabutops shares striking resemblances to Scyther, the bug-type Pokémon introduced in the same generation. The sides at the end of his arms might have proven to be an evolutionary advantage that kept throughout the eons, but its hard rock shell might have become a liability at some point, and evolution might have guided this species towards the more nimble Scyther, granting it, for example, the ability to fly. Something similar might have occurred with the Amaura line, where a change in the Earth's temperature might have melted away the icy regions where Amaura and Aurorus lived, thereby forcing them to adapt to more tropical climates, leading to their eventual evolution into the organism we know as Tropius. As a final example of potential Darwinian evolution, we can consider the Tertoga line, an ancient amphibian Pokémon similar to a real-world turtle. Perhaps this Pokémon was guided by its environment to survive much more easily in land than in the sea. The effect of a drying out of the environment may have made life at sea more challenging than inland, which forced them to venture further into the continent and away from the coast. This behavior, extrapolated throughout a vast time, might have resulted in mutations that left the ancient Tirtuga looking like the Pokémon we now call Chewtle and Dreadnought, who still resemble a real-world turtle but have paws more specialized for traverse land than the amphibian extremities present in Tirtuga. Obviously, these three examples are pure conjecture, since there truly is no evidence to link these species together, but the advent of past paradox Pokémon gives us some room for theorizing. So, what do you think? Are fossil Pokémons examples of past paradox Pokémon that evolved into currently existing versions? Or are we instead presented with examples of biological lines that went extinct at some point in the distant past? Let us know in the comments and subscribe to Rebel Culture. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.